It's Speaking with Gravity, and I am Curvin.
I'm D.
And I'm Ty.
And we're the hosts for a podcast that speaks on mental health in our community and how everything affects everything. With every episode, the goal is to have a conversation that will make you think, make you feel, make you do what is best for you. I'm a therapist, but this isn't therapy, it's a podcast. And we have a disclaimer.
While we serve as mental health professionals, the information and content being discussed during our podcast is not intended to be utilized or substituted as therapy. The purpose of this broadcasting is to share our personal perspective through open dialogue about various content based on our personal, educational, and professional experience.
So we got a final episode of the year for 2021. Thought we'll go out with a bang. I don't know how happy or how sad or how mad I am about having to discuss this particular topic. But the episode title is going to be Toxic Masculinity, right? So we have a guest here to help me out. I got another man to help me out because I didn't want to be bombarded by my two lovely female hosts. So I got another podcast host to come and help me out. Somebody who ain't scared to talk, because he got a podcast. He ain't scared to talk. Mr. Joseph Barr of the Jonessa podcast. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself so you can better do it than I just did it.
Gotcha. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on to the Speaking with Gravity podcast. Curve, Ty, D, it is an honor. What you all are doing is absolutely amazing, and it's just an honor for me to be a part of this discussion. Yes, I am a podcast host. I host a podcast with my wife, Danessa. The title of our podcast is the Jonessa Podcast, Conversations from the Couch. And we've been doing this this is year 2, season 2, and we are enjoying it. We're growing, and we consider Speaking with Gravity kind of our cousin podcast as well.
What is it? Cousin? Couch cousin.
Couch cousin.
Couch cousin.
Yes. We tease Kirby. He is our resident Dr. Phil of our podcast. Like Oprah used to bring in Dr. Phil. But we've been doing it for 2 years, and I work in the human services field as well. I work for BHG, Behavioral Health Group, where I'm a director of one of their treatment facilities.
All right. So you know a little bit about us. We got what we call Twitter discussions. I might have to change that at some point, just branding Twitter like crazy. But we find something on the internet, and then we discuss it.
Gotcha.
All right. So I found this from Greg. That's who wrote this. I don't know who Greg is, but Greg put some thought into this. Greg said, Bootsy, it beat a murder charge, a decade in prison, cancer, and yet his greatest obstacle is Lil Nas X. So, what you got to say about that? You want me to go first, or you just gonna dive in?
Wow. I'm gonna let you go first. I want to see what you say, and maybe I can bring something a little bit different to the table.
All right, I'm just gonna off the top of the dome, right? So we're talking about toxic masculinity. And when he says Lil Nas X is Bootsy's greatest obstacle, I really don't think it's an obstacle for Bootsy. Bootsy's literally just speaking on it. He has an opportunity to speak on it. He has a right to speak on it to some degree. And I just think that's what it is. Maybe the media is putting more out there on it. Is that toxic for him to actually speak on it? Is it overly masculine for him to speak on it? I don't think so. That the tweet didn't say that, but I don't think it's a Lil Nas X is an obstacle for him. I just think he feels like he has the right to say something, and I'm going to say something. You're not going to tell me I can't say anything against him just because he's a part of a certain community. So that's my thoughts.
That's interesting. I wouldn't call it an obstacle either. What I will say is I think it's very interesting what people choose to focus and put their attention on. Mm-hmm. And I think that really says a lot about the individual on what you choose to put your interest on. In this battle, I'm not really in the social media realm as far as celebrity gossip and what's going on, but I am familiar with
You couldn't miss that one.
The back and forth that's going on between Bootsy and Lil Nas X. And I wonder, these are just my thoughts. I always preface this by saying that I wonder if Bootsy may be fighting a battle within himself, and he's maybe projecting that battle out by going back and forth with Lil Nas X, because I don't see any other hip hop artists that are going back and forth with Lil Nas X. Maybe he is a little insecure about his masculinity and, dare say, sexuality.
Okay. All right. I ain't gonna jump on that one. we could ride that way, but I'm not gonna ride that way. That's an interesting thought, and I have seen that as well, where people are saying, is he projecting? Because he's always got something to say. But all right, we're gonna go to QD of the hour to get into the episode.
So QD of the hour, also known as quotable data, is just another version of fun facts, information for you to be able to provide to your friends, family, colleagues, coworkers, and church members. According to a 2013 report from the World Health Organization, also known as WHO, 1 in 3 people who identify as a woman are negatively impacted by the effects of toxic masculinity in the form of domestic violence, including sexually transmitted infections or STIs/STDs, and negative mental health implications.
In the intro.
Toxic masculinity doesn't only kill women, it kills men too. The consequence of this kind of messaging is boys becoming men who are emotionally blunt and who may find it hard to connect with others. In the worst of cases, it can transform into rage and isolation. Today we will explore toxic masculinity and what it means to our society.
All right. And I guess I'll start it off, but I'm pretty sure Ty and D are gonna kind of take it over because I'm the man. So y'all gonna. I hope that's not toxic for me to say I'm the man, but y'all gonna take it over and ask me some questions. But toxic masculinity, is it even really real? That would be my first question, and I'm gonna let you. Well, I'll say my thoughts first, and then I'll let you say. I do think it is real. You could put toxic in front of anything, and that's real. But in the same token, I think a lot of times what we're doing is we're taking something that's not necessarily toxic. It might be masculine, and then we're saying it's toxic because it was toxic to you, or that person went overboard, and so now we're labeling everything as toxic masculinity. As I was doing the research for this particular episode, I was trying to find the exact definition. I eventually read it, or it'll be read, but I hated that it kept comparing it to traditional masculinity. Traditional masculinity, as I know it, isn't necessarily toxic, but there's certain aspects of it where if I keyed on it or if I played on it too much, it could become toxic. So then that would, but you can't say, I can't use that as my definition. Traditional masculinity going overboard or something. I don't think that should be used. It should be something else, and I don't know what that something else is. Is it real?
That's a great question, Curve, and I love what you said. And I'm going to say, no, it's not real because we're mislabeling it.
Yeah.
There's a difference between masculinity and societal male norms. When you speak of masculinity and femininity, you have to understand that those two things are not gender specific. Exactly. We have masculine traits and we have feminine traits. Some people have more than others. Some people have more on the other side. Some people are equally balanced with that. Just to self-disclose, my wife and I, we were having this conversation. We were talking about it. I said, I use my brother as an example. He leans more towards the masculine side. With myself, I have more of a balance of masculine and feminine. Our leadership styles, my wife leads with a more masculine authority. I lead with a more feminine authority. It's just energies. There's just a difference in the two things. So I think what we need to do to have a very mature conversation about this is we have to learn to differentiate between gender, masculinity and male, and femininity and female. There's bad, poor male behavior, and there's bad, poor female behavior. But it has nothing to do with whether something is masculine or something is feminine.
Oh, well, we about to wrap this up right now, the way that you broke that down, ain't it? So how would you, if you had to define it, how would you define it? Just like that or anything else?
I would define toxic masculinity. I would just put an X through that and say toxic male behavior.
Okay.
Toxic male behavior is being misogynistic, is suppressing your emotions, is only looking at females through one lens or one prism, just saying females are meant to be in the kitchen raising kids. That's a toxic male behavior. That's a toxic male mindset. Masculinity has absolutely nothing to do with that. Masculinity is just traits of a male. Or not see, we're so used to doing that. I even do it and slip up sometimes. Just traits of an individual. Certain traits of everybody are a little bit more masculine and a little bit more feminine. Logic, reason, a little bit more masculine. Nurturing and taking your time, that's a little bit more feminine. I find myself leaning more towards the feminine side when I'm leading my on my job or leading in my household. Believe it or not, my wife, who is a soft woman, she leads in a more masculine way in her job or at home. But neither one is either toxic if you are more dominant towards one trait and more dominant towards the other trait. Just because I'm a person who is a lot more logical and a lot more methodical in my decision making, that doesn't mean that I'm toxic. Now, if I'm a person who is very demeaning or very just authoritative and not giving individuals and just asserting myself as the dominant figure in the home, that's toxic male behavior. So I think we have to start the conversation there is really being specific on what is bad male behavior and what is bad female behavior, and just eliminate masculine and feminine from the conversation.
So you were saying something that came to my mind. You're explaining as traits. So what traits do we align collectively as a group? What traits do we align with masculinity? And for me, I aligned protector. I aligned provider with it. Other ones, I hate to say it. I think I would say aggressive. I would connect that to masculinity, and probably assertive. Those if somebody said masculinity or are they talking about somebody being masculine, those things are going to come to my mind when it comes down to that. Any other terms that y'all have? Anybody?
I was just going to say, kind of going back with what Joseph stated, my first time of really being able to differentiate the traits of being masculine and being feminine, I read the book The Way of the Superior Man by David, I forget his last name. And
Great
he
book.
broke
Yes.
that down, and from there my perspective changed on those traits exist within both men and women, and one may be more dominant than the other. So I've shifted my view and perspective too on whether masculine traits, are strictly associated with a particular gender. No, it resides in both. It's just which one is more prominent than the other, or are they both equally balanced? And that's where that yin yang comes into place too. So I don't have another term for it, but just awareness on my certain behavioral traits and the things that I project, and possibly onto others as well, and stuff I need to do better, possibly.
But I do. Did you want to go, D?
No.
But I do agree. Yeah, what you did, the terms that you threw out, the characteristics you threw out, Curve, those are masculine characteristics. But the difference is in our society and probably just Western culture in general, we only give those terms and those characteristics to men, and we only give the other characteristics to women. But like Ty said, we have both of those aspects within us. So because my mother, even though my parents were married, but they divorced when I was around the age 5 or 6. So guess what? When I was with my mother, she had to be the protector. She had to be that person who had all of those characteristics that you threw out. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's so important, that when we start having this conversation, which is a great conversation to have, we have to start there, because we don't want to a term like masculine that just is a lot more deep. We made it such a shallow term. It's beyond the surface. We have to dig deeper in that and just start focusing on negative, bad male behavior.
Yeah. When you say we have to do, we're basically trying to change the thought process behind it, right? And when you talking like that, again, maybe I'm old school, right? So I'm connecting these to masculine. But if I don't be assertive, if I'm not a protector, if I'm not a provider, if I'm not aggressive, then how am I viewed? D, how would you view me if I'm not aggressive, if I'm not assertive? Let's say we ain't gonna say provider because I've always been a provider. But even looking at my size, you wouldn't necessarily think I'm a protector. So,
I
you know,
think when you're asking that in the concept of how it would be traditionally viewed, you would be, it could be viewed as, I guess, I want to say femininity, but we're trying to get away from this concept. And I guess, just even exploring it, because even in my role, I guess listening to you bring in the perspective of not trying to
it's almost like you're not trying to label it.
label
right?
it, right. And I'm a person that understands what labeling does, and then what we have done is we've placed a label on it and then told people this is how you act, and then this is what people have done. And so ultimately we are becoming our own self-fulfilling prophecy, because we are saying this is what I have to be in order to be this way. So thinking in tradition, most times males have to be considered aggressive. So if I choose to walk away from this altercation, what does that mean? Does that mean that I can't fight, or that I'm scary? All of these other traits, versus I'm just intellectual and I know that the consequence of this behavior and ultimately the potential outcome that it would create. Like, thinking now, like, what would that look like? What would people say? And that's constantly, I think, one of the things that prohibit us from really being able to truly be in tune with who we are, is the concept of how will I be viewed? What will it in turn look like or sound like, or how will people perceive me if I'm not what I'm expected to be? I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just feel like especially the way that you're explaining it, it's almost like we're getting rid of and the way that Ty is explaining it as well. It's like we're getting rid of that label of masculine and feminine, right? When we go to the grocery store, do we just have boxes out there? Oh, we got labels because we want to know
Right.
what's inside the label.
Right.
So ain't nothing wrong with labeling it. It might be wrong with saying like you said earlier, you have to be this way. But if we get rid of the label, then am I telling my son wrong? You have a son too, right? Am I telling my son wrong with, son, you got to be able to work and bring some money into the house?
I think, though, it's important when you talk about what we're telling people is the information we give people behind it. So it's just like, I tell you, Kervin, you have to go out and be a lawyer, but I don't provide you with the steps that it's going to require in order to become that. Now you're feeling obligated to fulfill something I haven't prepared you to be. So I think it's important that when you label something or you say what something is, that you allow him to educate. So when you're saying you need to be a provider, why? What does that mean? Or you need to be able to make money. What does that mean? You're going to need to be able to do that so that you can take care of yourself, to be able to provide for your significant other, to be able to take care of your children. This is the role. And so when I'm listening, as Joseph explained it, like the importance of deciphering between toxic male behavior, because I am one that always tells my son, you are not going to be a toxic, you're not going to practice toxic masculinity. But now I'm looking at it as, and I'm thinking I'm saying the right thing, but listening to him, I'm still telling him that if he's doing anything, I'm tibbling, because I'm telling him to be something, but then I'm saying that it's negative for him to be that. So again, I like that you clarified that and put me in a different perspective to be able to say my language is just as powerful as the actual selection or description that I'm providing.
Yeah, and it's not about. I understand what you're saying when it comes to the labels, but just taking it back to how we started off this conversation when we were talking about the hip hop artists Lil Bootsy and Lil Nas X. What we have to start doing is making sure that we're not saying that Bootsy is more masculine or more of a male than Lil Nas X is, and I think that's where this when we use these negative male behaviors and we try to say that Bootsy is just very masculine, and no, he's a very proud, boastful male. But I'm not going to say that little Bootsy is more masculine than little Nas X, because if we got to know little Nas X, when we're just talking about just the definitions of what the two actually mean, little Nas X has more masculine energy than little Bootsy. And if you really study what the two really mean,
Exactly.
you will be surprised that little Bootsy is really embodying more of a feminine type of traits.
Yeah.
Hello. And it's okay too, though.
It's okay,
I think it's
yeah.
like this. What I'm gathering from this is unlearning and relearning. You know what I'm saying? And with education, we're able to change our language and how we're describing certain traits that exist within any being, whether male or female. So like you were saying, when encouraging your son to go out and to have a job, to be a provider for who? For self first and foremost. But I can share that same message with my daughter. You going out and you being a provider for who? For yourself first and foremost. And then if you have a family, for your family. It doesn't come with, again, it's not assigned to a gender.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What would be toxic? What would be some what's the question?
Oh, so you want to get to the questions. Let us help lead the way. I think we've kind of processed through what it is. So let's talk about, is toxic male behaviors. Let's just start there. Let's describe what are toxic male behaviors. What behaviors would you guys consider that? You guys talked about kind of what masculine traits are. What are toxic male behaviors?
I think from just me being personal, me telling somebody that they don't have a right to be this way. Like you said earlier, they have to be this if they're gonna be X, Y, and Z. That's toxic. We saying toxic masculinity, but that's toxic overall. You can't just tell somebody how they gotta move. You can admonish them, you can advise them, whatever, but that's how you see the world. That's your perspective. My brothers say different experiences, different perspective. And so, that being said, that would be toxic. Me forcing this type of case in point, I love sports, love it to death, and my son, I'm gonna pick on him today. Got him into soccer, basketball, flag football, all of that, and he didn't have the same energy, the same vigor that I had when it came down to that. And then I finally had a discussion with him one day and was like, I love sports, but you don't have to love it. You gonna still be my son regardless. I'm still gonna love you. You're still gonna be a boy. And when I said it, I couldn't believe it. It was almost like I saw a weight coming off of his shoulders. And he still, he'll watch stuff with me, but he just not into it like I'm into it. And so I think just letting him know that he didn't have to be X, Y, Z. He didn't have to be like this. Just gave him a sense of relief. And so when we do the opposite, that can be toxic.
Yeah. I love that you shared that with us, because that's so important, because this is such an important topic, because for the people out there listening, you may not be aware, but our young men, they're really not in a good place mentally and emotionally, because they're trying to figure out where they fit into this new world because of those societal norms for a male being a quote unquote protector and a provider are not as useful as it was 100 years ago, not even 50 years ago, because the advances in technology, women having a voice, and they feel very empowered. So there are a lot of young men looking around and saying, where do I fit in? Well, the way we can kind of make them fit into this way is start informing them and telling them that this doesn't equal being masculine. This doesn't equal being feminine. You have both of those things, so you don't have to feel like you have to play sports. You don't have to feel like you have to be the tough guy. So it's very important that you had that conversation with your son and just allowing men to be vulnerable. We all heard it. Men don't cry.
Yeah.
How toxic is that?
Yeah.
And even, I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm sitting up here on this panel, but I even have to remind myself when my son gets emotional, allow him to be emotional. He's figuring it out. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay for men to be vulnerable. So that's one toxic thing that we need to start eliminating, is allowing men to be vulnerable and express their emotions of how they really feel and stop suppressing how they feel.
And I think what I'm taking from what both of you guys are saying in there is the perception or the understanding that something being different automatically equals negativity. That is the true perspective. I think for me, Kervin, in relation, I struggle because people often look at my son's physique and they say, or is he going to play football, or is he going to do this? And in all actuality, I don't want him to do that unless it's what he wants to do. Ultimately, I can see now he likes to dance and sing. But I also know that toxic male behavior or toxic perceptions of male behaviors, what that will accustom him to. So making sure, I guess, in terms of you having that conversation with him so he knows the disapproval looks he may receive, the judgment he may receive because it's outside of the norm, and reinforcing the concept that I guess that's okay.
Are the rules changing for I guess they are, based off of what we're saying, right? The rules are changing between what is feminine and what is masculine, right? How do we share that with the masses, or how do we share it in our homes?
I think, like we've been reiterating on this episode, is explaining the difference between male gender and masculine and feminine. Those two things are not the same. There's a difference between the two. And I know this is a shock. Listen, my grandfather, who I'm named after, he was a man's man. Mm-hmm. And when I was thinking about this episode today, I'm like, I wonder how my granddaddy would fit into today's world. Don't cry, be a man. Mm-hmm. You know, that was his saying, be a man, son. Mm-hmm. And we have to start changing and understanding that, yes, it's okay to be a male. It's okay to be a man. But understanding that being a man and masculinity are two different things. You can be a man and may have more feminine traits about yourself, and the traits are not gender specific. So I think that's where we have to start, is understanding in this new world, this new understanding on what masculine and feminine is that those are not gender specific. Those are just traits.
And I think understanding too where that may originate from. As you were saying, I was just sitting back thinking our ancestors, you know, being enslaved and then what they were accustomed to versus now being in this new environment and what they were forced to do, or what they chose to do too, because ultimately it still boiled down to a choice, in my opinion. Either I'm going to do this, or I may just feel free and take my own life to avoid this, you know. But given the choices that they made in the situations that they were in, this is what it means to be a man, you know. And so from that, our grandparents and great-grandparents learned from their parents and grandparents, this is what it means to be a man. So we're steadily passing that down, you know, and this is where we are today. But I think this new wave of us young millennials, and as we become more educated and we really understand the meanings of these words and terms, is like we're undoing things and we're relearning things, and we're creating a different narrative, and becoming more intelligent and knowledgeable about the things that I guess we've been taught. That's it for me.
I love that, and I didn't mean to cut your wisdom off,
you
D.
you're perfect.
Like Ty articulated that so well. We are learning and we are growing, and that's why it seems so chaotic and it's hard, and sometimes people are hurt by this conversation. But you have to understand, growth is uncomfortable. And you go through growth pains. So in the society that we're living in, even though it appears to be so chaotic, what you have to understand is that we're actually growing and we're working, you know, this thing out to where we will eventually get to that place where everybody understands the difference between the two, toxic male behavior and masculine traits.
And I think it's important too when we talk about this, the idea that masculinity and femininity doesn't equal sexual orientation. I think if we really get down to the meat of what the dilemma is, even going back to our Twitter discussion, is really sexual orientation. And when we talk about sexual orientation, that's something totally separate from traits or behaviors. It may be common practices that people participate in, but I think that's the biggest concept or the biggest challenge for people when a person does do something that's outside of societal's normalities, because, well, if they're behaving this way, they must be, this. There's no way that they could be a man and act this way. But in oftentimes, and I think that's kind of where we are now, what we're seeing more of is traditionally it was kind of that way. Like people adjusted their feminine traits or their feminine behaviors to kind of mirror sexual orientation, but now that's not the case. Like, it's because men are getting pedicures and manicures. They're maintaining their they're doing all of these things that, wait a minute now, you would only do that if you were trying to allude to what your sexual orientation was. And I think if we can take our mind frames from people's bedrooms and really bring it back to who they are, trying to understand a person and not trying to project our biases and stereotypes of people onto them, then we really can see and reduce this notion of toxicness.
Yeah, that's
Curve, you look like you're struggling, my guy.
nah, it's deep. It's deep. But as I'm listening to y'all again, I feel like that term, a man's man, we start to that becomes obsolete to some degree when we start talking about just traits, which is fine. It's fine. When we talk about validation, I like to hear, "Oh man, you're a real man," because you're providing or you're protecting. I'm gonna have to find validation in some other phrase now, because we're taking away from that. We're not saying woman. We're not saying man. That phrase, "a man's man," is almost in connection with toxic masculinity, because you don't have, when we talking about man's man, the way that I've learned it is they ain't so focused on your feelings. They don't care about what you think. On it, just do what you got to do, in essence. And that ain't the way it's supposed to go down, really.
But I don't think you have to change that about you. I just think you have to understand that everybody else doesn't think like you. And so what you feel and how you conduct yourself, that's you. You're entitled to that. And some of that is going to be internalized in you. And so it's not like you're going to be able to change every single thing about your makeup. This has been you for years. But the idea is when your perceptions, you begin to project them on other people, and now you discredit who they are because of how you view or how you want to behave. That's where the error is occurring. If you sit here and try to say, well, I got to do this, I can't, you're going to mess yourself up, because then now you're going to be playing mind games with yourself. And I think it's important to be confident in who you are, because what I've learned is when men know who they are, really, you can put them in a room with whomever, and it doesn't change them either way. But it's alarming for me, because some men, like, they won't go in certain settings because of their homophobia or because of the perception of it. But other men, like, I see men sometimes some men won't step foot in a nail salon. Other men will go with their wives to nail salons, and then some men will get their nails in hands done. But they're all three different levels of male behaviors. And my perception is all of them could be right in their own validity if that's what they're preferring. But I guess it's the concept of it's where I'm judging you if I'm sitting there waiting on my wife and you're sitting there getting your hands done. You see, that's when the behavior becomes toxic.
Yeah. And I think the quote unquote man's man still will have a place in the modern day society, because you still can appreciate certain aspects of a man's man. I hate using celebrities and public figures as an example, but two men who I think represent being a man's man that are very different is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Barack Obama. I look at both of those as still being males, positive males, but I don't think that The Rock, just because of his physique and he's in action movies, is more of a man than Barack Obama, who was the president of the United States. I mean, you still can appreciate, and I think it's fair to say that Barack Obama probably has more feminine energy than The Rock does, and The Rock has more masculine energy than Barack Obama, but they're still a quote-unquote man's man.
And Barack probably got more basketball skills than Dwayne Johnson too. All right. Did y'all have anything else? Did we beat a dead horse?
I think we did. I think we're leaving people with really defining themselves. Like not take off labels, but understand the label that you have assigned to yourself, and understanding it may not match the box sitting next to you.
No. Good ending. Did you have anything you wanted to add to?
I just want to say that thank you for allowing me to come on your podcast and talk about this conversation, because I'm very passionate about this conversation. Because, and I'll be completely honest and transparent, I didn't think that if you would have went back into the past and told Joseph 10 years ago that he would be on this podcast talking about this and taking the stance that he did, I would probably look at you a little bit crazy. But like we all articulated, we're growing and we're becoming more knowledgeable and more understanding. And no matter how you feel, if you could take anything away from this episode, like Dee said, we have to start by separating the two. Separate gender and separate masculine and feminine. Start there, then let everything else fall into its proper place.
I think it goes back to I was listening to you on your podcast this week, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was to the extent of, if you're not involved, then you're not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And we continuously got involved. 10 years ago, when I met you around about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought we would even be on a podcast or have a podcast, much less be talking about this type thing. But it's because we're evolving. We both got married. We both continued education, went and had careers and experienced what we experienced in our respective careers. So kudos to you and everything that you're doing right now. And the Jonessa podcast episodes come out when? And where can they find you?
Episodes drop every Monday. You can find us on all major streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, all the major ones. You can catch us on YouTube too. You can follow us on Instagram at The Jonessa Podcast. Like our Facebook page, The Jonessa Podcast. Email us at The Jonessa Podcast. I tried to keep everything consistent, but just appreciate the support, and we're just excited to just help people. That's what we want to do, bottom line.
Yeah, y'all should become couch cousins. That's what we're saying, right?
That's right, awesome. Couch cousins.
I love that phrase. She needs to do branding for us too, couch cousins.
That's what's up. I'll let her know.
All right, thank y'all for everyone that listened. Subscribe to Speaking with Gravity on Facebook and Instagram. Also subscribe to 6-1 Event Rentals for all your event rental needs. And also every fourth Monday of each month, beginning again in January, we have a BIPOC wellness group for men. BIPOC being black,
indigenous,
people of color. I can't say the word, so you have to say it for me. Again, thank y'all for liking, sharing, and supporting the movement to increase mental health awareness within our community. Thank you to Mr. Winston for audio and visual production. Thank you for taking the time to listen. You could be doing anything else right now, but you chose to listen to us, and we appreciate that. We are therapists, but this ain't therapy. It's a podcast.